Did you know that you can tell the history of the world by tracing the history of salt? At least according to Mark Kalinsky, who wrote this great book called Salt, A World History. According to Kalinsky, salt and the history of salt is the history of civilization. Salt routes became trade routes, which led to cities. Salt, for a long time, was more valuable than gold. Wars were fought over access and control of salt, and control of salt led to revolutions and supported empires. In ancient Rome, soldiers were paid in salt, and if a soldier got his salary cut, he would be told that he wasn't worth his salt. And that phrase came because the Greeks and the Romans used to buy their slaves with salt. Salt, so valuable and important. I had no idea. When I think about salt, I think about this. Now, I'm a wannabe foodie, so I also kind of know about this kind of salt, that was in Phil's. I go to Whole Foods occasionally. This is Phil's children's moment. But really, when I think about salt, I think, it's good for French fries and potato chips, but I try not to eat it very much. And for the most part, it's not so special, not so kind of unique, or really all that valuable. So when I read, "You are the salt of the earth," I'm like, yeah, kind of goes past me. For Jesus's followers, the ones listening to Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount that day, it would have been very different. They would have known the material, for sure, the material value of salt, but also the religious and cultural value of salt. It had deep meaning for them. Salt, for the Hebrew people, was very symbolic of the qualities of God, particularly God's faithfulness and covenant. Probably comes from salt's preservative qualities, but it became emblematic of the fidelity and the covenant between God and God's people. The ability of salt to preserve or to make pure or to keep things from spoiling. And of course, the ability to flavor, that all these things became seen as God's gift, salt as God's gift to the people, and as a representative of God's very self on earth. So when Jesus looked out at those people listening to him and said, "You are the salt of the earth," they would have known that's a big deal. Especially since Jesus didn't say, "You could be the salt of the earth. You should be the salt of the earth. You might be if you do fill in the blank." He said, at least according to Matthew's text, "You are the salt of the earth." That is good news. Hallelujah. You are enough, people of God. The thing is, the statement doesn't really end there. There's this but. There's always a but, right? You are the salt of the earth, but if salt loses its flavor, how can saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. The good news potentially comes with a warning, or at least an implied question for the disciples. Have we lost our saltiness? What does that mean? So scholars have debated forever about this statement because really salt can't lose its quality as salt. It's a very stable, non-reactive compound. Salt always is salt. Saltiness, however, is something different. You can have all the salt you want, right? This can be full. You can have a huge block of pink Himalayan salt here. But it's only salty when it's spread, when it's tasted, when it comes out of its shaker. Jesus was defining his disciples as salt and reminding them that their quality of saltiness comes when they're out spread in the world. Have we lost our saltiness? Have I lost my saltiness? So I just got back from the women's retreat, where we had 56, I think, women up in Mill Valley for Friday night and Saturday for the women's retreat, and it was an incredible, wonderful time. And the topic of our women's retreat was wholehearted living. And essentially, wholehearted living, it comes from that phrase and the kind of the topic that we looked at came from this work by this woman, this researcher, qualitative researcher named Brené Brown. Maybe some of you know her or heard of her. She's done a lot of research around shame and what it takes to live with a whole open heart. So we talked about this concept of wholehearted living, and basically the tenet is people who are wholehearted, who live with abundance and grace and filled with the Spirit of God and accept their imperfections and live just fully present in the world, that those people are people of courage, compassion, and connection. Courage to embrace their imperfections, compassion for themselves and for others, and people of deep connection, which comes when we let go of thinking of who we're supposed to be and embrace who we actually really are and are willing to be that person in the world. Wholehearted living, to me, sounds a lot like being salty. And it's really challenging. There are so many forces, internal, at least to me, internal and external, that keep our salt securely in its shaker, right? So, shame. There's something about me that if people knew it, I would no longer be worthy of love and connection. That's how Brené Brown defines shame. Everybody has it. Everybody. We don't want to talk about it. And the less we talk about it, the more we have it. Shame keeps our salt in the shaker. Fear. Judgment, either real or perceived. Insecurity. Persecution, oppression, keep our salt in the shaker. And what she says, and what we talked about, is that the secret for getting your salt out of the shaker is to lean into those things, right? Lean into exactly the things that we don't want to lean into, to be willing to risk shaking out your salt, to let yourself be seen, to live with a full heart, to embrace gratitude and joy, that those are the things. And one more, to believe that you are enough, to believe that you are this perfect grain of salt that God created, and that all the beautiful qualities of God exist in you as well. That's what it takes to get our salt out of the shaker, to be the salt that the world needs. So I want to give you 2 examples of this week of where I've seen this happen, actually just in the last 3 days. One is actually at the women's retreat. So this topic we had of wholehearted living, and we talked a lot about vulnerability, because that's actually the crux of it. Because the places where we feel vulnerable are also the places where we carry shame and fear and insecurity. But it also, it turns out, vulnerability is the birthplace of joy and love and transformation. So we asked these 56 women, who ranged in age from early 20s to over 90 years old, some of whom have been in our community for over 30 years, some who have maybe been here 3 times, people who know each other really well, people who don't know each other at all. We put them into random groups and we asked them to share their most vulnerable moments with each other. And the incredible thing is that people took the risk to do that. And in the 24 hours we were there, I could feel the saltiness in the room increase as people shared their stories, as they were willing to be seen, to be fully present with their whole heart for themselves and for the stories they were hearing, as they were willing to think about those places that have been vulnerable for them to hold them with gratitude, actually, and joy for the lessons that we learned from those. As they were willing to do that, this amazing thing happens. Those places that feel so shameful have less power over us, and we build deep connections with each other. The other example I have is Thursday night. So many of you know, I think probably all of you know, that we were invited to partner with BOCA, Berkeley Organizing Congregations for Action, and several other congregations in our neighborhood to do a ceasefire walk against violence in this neighborhood, in response to several strong armed robberies that have happened in our neighborhood. And this is actually part of an ongoing strategy across our country called Lifelines to Healings. And the point of it is to get people out of their homes, out of their congregations, and into the streets at night to be a presence of community. It's not a protest. It's not even a march. It's a walk through your neighborhood. And as we gathered on Thursday evening, more and more people kept pouring into Loper. Like 50 people came on a rainy Thursday night to walk, a 3-block radius around our church. Many of you were there. And again, as we walked, kind of 2 by 2, talking to people that we may not know from other congregations, League of Women Voters was there, people from Cal, walking through our neighborhood, sharing stories, interacting with the people that we met. The saltiness of the community became greater, at least for me. To watch the faces of the students as we handed out this leaflet that basically said, we want you to be safe in your neighborhood. We want you to be able to thrive here. To go to the women's shelter and say, we see you. We know that you are here, wanting and striving and struggling for a life that will be sustainable for you. We want you to be safe. To just be together in community and do that was salt for the world. The reason I bring up those 2 examples is because I think they're important for a variety of reasons. The most significant to me is they aren't actually, on the face of it, that huge, or they can look like that big of a deal. Being salt, pouring your salt out of a shaker is not something to add to your to-do list. It doesn't mean being more socially just, more perfect, more compassionate. It means being who God created you to be and being willing to take the risk to be that in the world. That when we can do that, that's when transformation happens. And the other thing is not just transformation for the community, but transformation for ourselves. Sometimes when I'm feeling the least salty, I'm having the hardest time getting my salt out of the shaker, that's when I need to come to this community. I need to remember that it's the other people of God, people who are committed to living their faith, who are sharing their salt. I can kind of step into that, and my salt gets loosened up. Let yourself be seen. Love with your whole heart. Practice gratitude and joy. Believe you are enough. Be salt. The world is hungering for it. The world needs us to spread our salt out of its shaker. May it be so. Amen.